Welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We are here with Alex Sanfilippo. He is the host of the top-rated entrepreneurship podcast, which is called Creating a Brand. And he's the founder of something that you are going to want to join even before this episode is over. You're going to kick yourself and think, why the heck didn't this exist before? Why didn't I think of it? It's called podmatch.com. This is a free service that matches podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. And that's even why we're here now. So Alex, glad to be talking to you.
Robert, thank you so much for having me and that plug right there at the beginning. Thank you, man. That means a lot.
I mean, that's why you're here, right? We're here to sell some books or sell some copies or, whatever the term is for, selling some stuff. But it's also good to mix in the education and the entertainment. And so yeah, tell me about yourself and podcast SOP and Podmatch and all that cool stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been a bit of a lifelong entrepreneur who got stuck in corporate for about 15 years. I thoroughly enjoyed that time, but when the idea of podcasting hit me, like when I decided to start a podcast, I realized, I want to move into podcasting full time. Like it's something that I love. So I started a show that ended up doing really well, and that's where the idea for Podmatch came into existence, which, as you mentioned, connects guests and hosts together. I was having trouble finding guests. And I wanted to be a guest sometimes. I wanted to meet cool people, and podcasters were always great, like you, Robert. So I was like, I got to get out there and meet some of these people. I got to find a way to do this. And just long story short, had the idea for it. And podcast SOP is the next thing, but same idea. I was just, hey, I want to get out there and serve podcasters. So for me, an entrepreneur through and through and just full-time in the podcasting space, because it's an area that I love, and I really just appreciate other hosts and listeners are great as well. So that's a little bit about me for you.
Well, fantastic. And I'm right there with you in that podcasting is something magical. I mean, I'm amazed when I do interviews and I talk to like YouTube ad people, Facebook ad people, Google ad people, and yet they're still on podcasts. Like their Google ads aren't so good that they can just give up podcasting.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, and feel free to steal it. And also, as you know, like sometimes you interview people who have like huge businesses, right? They have like $10 million, $20 million businesses, and yet they're still slumming it on podcasts. So there must be something to this podcasting thing.
Yeah, there's got to be. One of the things that I know to be true, and you've heard this before, I did not make this up, but people do business with who they know, like, and trust. People do business with who they know, like, and trust. And to develop some sort of know, like, and trust with somebody, they have to feel like they get to know you. That's hard to do with a website. That's hard to do with an advertisement. That's hard to do just because you have a massive business. But when you listen to somebody talk for 10 or 15 minutes or longer or shorter, whatever it might be, you can start to know as the listener if you know, like, and trust that person who's sharing their expertise. And I think that's why we're seeing so many big business people joining, the people that are into advertising, they're into blogging, all those things. We're seeing them join podcasting because they want to develop that know, like, and trust with their ideal clients.
I agree completely. And I mean, you always hear about how Gary Vee loves to say like, well, there used to be just 3 TV channels and now there's all these different things. And it's like, how the heck do you still get in front of eyeballs? Well, it's by kind of being customized, by being like, personalizable, and by like just showing up to all these places where you need to be showing up. So we need to be podcasting more, and it's cool that you have this service. And I mentioned it earlier today on a mastermind call that I do. I've mentioned Podmatch already to a bunch of people, and
thank you.
I mean, I can't help it. It's such a good idea. We all need to be doing it. But my problem is like my spiel for it is a little wrong because I say, well, it's a dating site for podcasters, but don't worry, it's not like to go on a date with another podcaster, but there's got to be it's like the reverse of that, but there's got to be a better way to kind of explain that. But I like your way better of you match up the guests and the hosts together. And so yeah, you said like you have this need of getting guests and being on other shows. And we sort of know like why this exists, but why the heck didn't this exist before? I mean, it's amazing that we made it this many years in podcasting. And as far as I know, like you're the only one that has this kind of service, right?
Yeah. Quick side note. You just mentioned like how you describe Podmatch. I described it the same way when I first got started. And one of my friends, she's a close friend, she asked me like 6 months into it. She goes, hey, how is that matching service you have for podcast hosts? She's like, I just love that you're putting them together and they're starting to date and stuff like that. I'm like, do you know what it does? And she's like, yeah, it connects 2 different people that are both podcast hosts together. I'm like, she's like, like farmers.com, but for podcasters. I'm like, not at all what we're doing. So thanks for clarifying that. But I had that wrong initially as well. But jumping back into the main point here that we were starting to dive into, I think that the first thing that I want to share about that is just coming up with the idea. Like, yeah, I had the need, but I needed to validate that need. And I think that it maybe didn't happen before because podcasting is still sort of at its infancy. Like, yeah, podcasting was around for about 20 years, but it's still fairly young if you think about the technology involved and things like that. So when I had the idea for it, I was actually speaking at a podcasting conference. And when I got off stage, I knew people would line up, not because I'm a good or bad speaker, but just because there's nice people and podcasters are nice people. So they'll line up and have a conversation with me. And I told my wife, I'm going to ask as many of them as I can what they're struggling with in podcasting. And when I did that, there's about 100 different people who said almost exactly the same thing. They said, Alex, I'm having trouble finding the ideal guest to be on my show. And when I went home, I was like, okay, this is a group of people I'm passionate to serve. I'm passionate about being a podcaster myself, but also helping other podcasters because so many of them have helped me. And now I have a problem that they're showing that they have. Can I come up with a solution? And by the way, it's a great way to start a business. An area that you're passionate about, find the problem, offer a solution. And again, because podcasting is in its infancy, I was able to go back to the drawing board and look at some other industries. And, full circle that we're talking about here, I went to dating websites and I started looking at those. As a matter of fact, we modeled the whole thing off of Hinge. I've been married too long to actually use a dating website, but I got permission from my wife to download one, use a fake name and stuff like that. And I didn't lead anybody on. I just wanted to test out how it worked. But the idea was, let's go to a more mature market and see what they're doing, and can we bring that over to what we're doing? So I know I'm talking a lot there, Robert, but that's basically how we had the idea for it, and we're able to offer that solution.
Well, was Bobby Roundtree the name that you used to join Hinge?
No, it was not.
Oh, darn it. Good guess.
No, I used Robert Plank was the name I used.
Oh, I mean, that's an even better solution. But I mean,
right.
but there's like 3 or 4 really good marketing lessons in there, and that's what's so great about podcasting is there's even there's a couple things. There's kind of like you get to kind of refine or fine tune your message, which like you never really quite get to perfection. It's always changing, so it's always good to kind of take your message on the road and kind of like see how it lands and see how you can change it. So that's good. But there's also it seems like there's the saying, you say kind of interesting or profound or useful things that even you don't realize are helpful, but then you kind of test it out on the marketplace, you test it out on the road. And even just kind of that little lesson there of, well, look at other industries, look at where they've already gotten the bugs out, and kind of put your ego aside and kind of dial up your imagination and say, well, what if this existed already in this other thing? I mean, I'm thinking about in other industries, some of them develop membership sites before the rest of us. Some of us started taking cryptocurrency payments before the rest of us. There's always something to be said about having that curiosity, looking outside your niche, and then kind of adapting what that they already have there. And so people need to be podcasting. They need a podcast. They need guests. They need to be on shows. They need to be on Podmatch. And to get a little selfish here, Alex, I'm really good about getting guests on my show, but I'm not quite super consistent about being on other shows. And I found maybe the reason is there's a lot more. It seems like there's a lot more relationship messaging to get on other shows. Someone wants to be on my show. Great. Here's a link. I'll take you. But then it's getting kind of back into the kind of the dating thing. It's all right, now if I'm the one asking for a date, it takes a little bit more work. So have you seen this happening? It just seems to be, for me, it's easier to get a guest than be a guest.
Yeah, 100%. And that's just because that's where the market's at right now. People are realizing the power of podcasting. So they want to be on shows, and I'll be real, there's a limit of shows. There's not too many of them at this point. And I know that if you look at top line numbers, I think there's over 4 million podcasts now. But if you actually look at how many shows are active, which to me active means they've posted in the last 90 days, and I believe that maybe Apple looks the same way. There's over 4 million shows, and there's less than 500,000 that have posted in the last 90 days. Now, 90 days might not even be that active, really. It might be 30 days. If you look at that, there's under 300,000. So there's actually not that many shows when you think about all the different categories that those shows could be in. And there's a lot of people realizing, hey, this is a good platform for me. I'm going to jump on as a guest. So it's a lot more competitive on the guesting side than actually being a host right now. And one more fact in there that's really interesting for podcast hosts, though, to kind of make that a great thing for them, is the listenership of podcasting is growing faster than the amount of shows, which means more listeners are coming into the market every day than people that are launching shows. So all of us should be able to capitalize on that. But anyway, by the way, real quick side note here, you have a great show, man. I wanted to reference 2 episodes. In case someone's hearing this one is the first one, go back and listen to episode 820. You had Mickey Kennedy on there. He talked about how to use press releases to get more visibility. Powerful episode. Another one, you had my friend John Meese. I believe it was episode 813, where he's a an amazing entrepreneur. I've been learning from him for like 10 years. The guy is brilliant. So 820 and 813, if this is your first time listening to the show, go jump back to those, because those are two that I really enjoyed. But anyway, sorry, I digress there. But going back into this point here, when you're trying to be a guest, you have to do something to separate yourself a little bit. And I think that so many of us, we have this idea of like, here's my story. Let me just put it out there and someone will be interested. I find that the best thing you can do is lead with some form of value, kind of like I just did when I was just talking about episodes of your show that I like. If I was going to pitch to try to be on your show, I would start with that and be like, hey, I listened to 2 episodes. I really enjoyed them. And by the way, I left you a 5-star review on Apple. Here's a picture of it so you can see it. Now I've kind of built a little bit of a relationship with you already, or at least you're going to let me down a little easier if you don't want me to be on your show, but you're not just gonna be like, who is this guy talking about himself? No, I started by leading with value. And I think that that is the very first step anyone needs to take.
And I like that a lot, because like when I get emails like that, it's like, okay, this isn't spam. If I just get the same old copy and paste, I'm thinking, I don't feel like the special girl on the dating site. They could have sent
Right,
this to 5,000 people today. So at least when they say, well, I like this show or I like that show. And then also same deal with, and it's like so easy to do, right? Leave a quick review, look at a couple of episodes, and that way you can say something a little bit custom and maybe have it be like 80% of your template, but then have a few little customizations. And I'm a little bit younger than you, and I've been on a few dating sites. I'm married now, but when I was like struggling with the dating sites, I went back to basics and read articles, and they said kind of like, use your template. That way you kind of like save some time, but then look at the person's profile and kind of look at what they're interested in, and like kind of have the best of both worlds, right? Have the usual proven thing that works, but then kind of change up your message. That way it's something a little bit custom. And so what's cool about, and also kind of reciprocating the customness of it. I think you're like maybe like the 4th guest I've had from your platform. I had Michael Killen on pretty recently.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, cool.
And same deal, had the relationship, and he was a good guest, and I was so impressed that I bought his book. And the way I found out about you initially was Tim Fitzpatrick, who went on. He came on. Yeah,
Tim, you've had Tim on your show too, so you've got some good guests, man. Tim is a machine too, man. Cool. Sorry, go ahead.
And I mean, it's okay. And he had so much good advice. And then even after we recorded, he had all these tips for me, including join Podmatch. And I was like, man, we should have recorded this. And so it's like we all need to be kind of maybe taking this podcasting thing seriously. And so what would you suggest in order to rise to the caliber of a John Meese or a Tim Fitzpatrick? How do we make the most of your platform? And like, how do we get on some good podcasts? Because like for me, I've been dedicating about half an hour per week to like going in and checking out some podcasts and sending some messages. But in this early stages here, I'm not really getting a lot of traction. I'm getting a little frustrated. So what would you say as far as like, how seriously should we be taking this whole podcasting thing? And like, what would you recommend as far as like the time management or the strategy or the repeat tasks as far as what we should be doing on Podmatch?
Yeah, first off, I want to comment on something you mentioned, because I think it goes right back to the meaningful request side of things. Some people might be listening to like, well, I don't have time to listen to podcasts. I just need to go ahead and send the pitch. But not all podcasts are created equally. You might listen to a show, and although it might be a good show, you might realize, oh, this is not going to be my ideal audience, or this is not going to, me and the host won't really mesh well. Like, that's why you listen up front. And for me, if I hear a podcast that isn't a good fit for me, I don't feel like I'd be a good guest on, I don't go leave them a bad review. I just go ahead and skip on that one, move on to the next one. But it starts with me, again, making sure I have some sort of, I said meaningful request, I'm sorry, that I'm leading with value. But the next thing that we need to talk about here is actually making a meaningful request. You talked about dating. Like, if you just had a template of like, oh, I like your hair and I like this and blah, 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 but you don't ever say, would you like to go on a date? Then you're not being very clear. So I think that's really important, is you set the expectation. So it's like, hey, I'm leading with value, and then we make a meaningful request to be like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. We could talk about this, and I'd like to be on your show. Would you be up for that? Now, it's probably maybe 10% of the time it actually works and comes through, and that's fine. I devote about an hour a week is what I do to my outreach, and I just set them on the calendar. So it's something that I'm doing intentionally. I never let my feelings get hurt. Actually, what I do is I send the messages, and then on Podmatch specifically, or on social media, when I used to do it that way, I'd archive the message. So if they don't respond, I just forget about it, hopefully, and then I don't have my heart broken at all. And that's a good strategy for me, but I do my best just to outreach, again, once a week for an hour. I set that time. I start by leading with value, and then make a meaningful request of like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. And then and that does really well. One other thing that's really helped a lot that I'll mention in here, Robert, because I think it's really important, is to offer some form of credibility. Now, what I mean by that, I'm not talking about like being like, I've been on 30 podcasts or I've done this. It's more so looking at what they've done with their time and maybe who is a mutual friend, and just be like, hey, Rob, I saw, or Fitzpatrick, I saw that you had Alex on your podcast, or you're on his podcast. I know him. He's been on my show too. Just wanted to connect with you. When you do that, now you've automatically looped yourself in with a friendship that they already have. And that makes it really easy for someone to be like, oh, yeah, for sure I'll have you on the podcast because I trust Alex, so I'm going to trust you as well because you know him as well. So offering that form of credibility that ties you together with that person's network is something that's really helpful. And I found that makes a really huge difference because you almost don't need to sell yourself anymore. If I have that credibility with somebody, then I'm good. I don't need to do anything else.
And it's so easy to do nowadays, right? Especially with LinkedIn, which I know is a little bit of a shortcut cheat code, but it just like some of these tactics we're talking about, there's kind of if you can find something where it's somewhat straightforward, but then it requires like a slight bit of creativity, like 20% creativity, 80% going through the motions, then you can kind of get the best bang for your buck, right? You can kind of make the most use of your time and pump up the numbers of what they need to be, contact as many hosts as you should, but you're also kind of spending the time to make it personal. And so you check those LinkedIn third connections. And then I've also noticed that like when I go and when I get a match on Podmatch, like a show that I'm contacting someone to get matched with, a lot of the times there's not a website for it, but usually there's an iTunes and a YouTube, and I usually scroll down and I almost always see you in it because you're the founder of the site. So now that you've been on my show, now I can say, hey, Alex has been on my show. So now on Podmatch, at least, that's almost like a default. Cool, you've had Alex on.
That's funny.
I've had Alex as well. And you're mentioning a little bit about like the send out this number of messages. I know it's kind of a weird loaded question, but is there like a more or less like a success rate? Because and I know it's like a weird question, but like sometimes I'm like thinking like, okay, do I need to send out like 20 or 30 or 50 to get booked on one? Like what kind of I don't know. I just like, how much legwork should we be expected to do as far as this podcast outreach?
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't figured out a direct answer for that yet, because as I continuously tweak the way I reach out, I see improvement. So I don't feel that I've actually capped what I can do yet. And so like, here's another example of something I recently started doing. I started mentioning toward the end, I should say, of like the pitch, I'm doing air quotes there, that I send out, I end with saying that, hey, I'd love to share the episode when it goes live, and I'll link to it from my website in a blog post. And that does something else for people. They're like, oh, not only does he want to be on he led with value, told me he liked the show, which is a great start, right? And then I had a meaningful request. He wants to be on the show. He wants to talk about this because he sees a gap in my show. And then he offered some credibility. He knows Robert, so do I. And then the last thing, like I just mentioned, is to actually say that I'm going to share the episode. Now that the host feels like, oh, wow, this person's really going to do well. When I started doing that, I saw another tick. And one more thing I'll mention, the last thing that got me the most responses out of anything is making it easy to say no, which sounds weird. Like it's probably counterintuitive when it comes to like sales. Like sales is like, you make them say yes, like lead them down a yes ladder where they just have to say yes. I make it really easy for hosts to tell me no. I just straight up say, usually I end it with something like, hey, if I'm not the right fit, I certainly don't want to waste your time or your audience's time. Just let me know. And I appreciate it either way. No hard feelings. Like I'll end it that way. Most people say don't do that. But I've actually gotten more responses than some people who say no, but they'll say, hey, but go check with this person because I think that you might actually be a better fit over here. And they're willing to do that because if I make it really hard to say no, most people just ignore it. Like no matter where, email, social media, Podmatch, it doesn't make a difference. People just ignore it because they don't want to feel like they're letting you down when you put some effort out there. You put yourself out there. People get like, I don't know, confrontation, scary for some people. But if you make it really easy, you might actually get a better response. So I know that's a little bit like I went around the circle there when it comes to answering your question. But for me, I'm still seeing my success rate improve. And with or without Podmatch, really, it's just a matter of me doing these 5 things that I just mentioned that have been very helpful. So I don't have a direct answer for how to really do well. It's just a matter of continuously figure out how to improve the way that you're doing your outreach.
Well, fair enough. And I get the feeling that like what I said, like sometimes I'll have these people on the show that it seems like they're just doing it to like kind of raise their profile. And it's just feels like some of these people are just saying, I'm going to put out what there's time to put out. And if I know my numbers, if I know my conversion rate, that's great. But I'm just going, I know that this thing needs to be a priority this hour a week, or do whatever research I need to do and contact these people. And I like that a lot with your answer there of like, it's almost like a disqualifier. And that right there, I mean, you're reminding me of early on when I did like podcasting. I didn't know why I was doing it, right? I was like, okay, well, I know I need to like connect more. I need to stay relevant. I was getting kind of tired of going to live events, and I was getting these guests, but I was like, well, why am I really doing it? And maybe around episode like 280 or something, I had this guest who was talking about the concept of like referral sources, of like there are going to be people in your circle who never will buy from you, but they have friends. And I mean, the dating analogy fits so well, because it's like having a bunch of female friends who they're in the friend zone. They're not going to date you, but maybe they have hot friends. So I feel like
Right.
the connections to the dating thing are like almost unlimited here. I feel like you need to make like a whole book called like Pod Love or something like that, and just like take
Dude, that's a great idea. I'm gonna get you to co-author that with me. Then we're gonna do that together.
Let's do it, joint venture. And it's like, well, you can almost just take a dating book, like 5 love languages or something, and just like copy and paste dating to podcast appearance. And I mean, it fits so well. And so, yeah, we need to be using Podmatch, but we also should be keeping an eye on this really amazing software tool that I want to make sure there's time to talk about, called Podcast SOP, to save us from the hassle of messing around with spreadsheets, Trello, Asana, who knows, whatever kind of spider web duct tape system we'll use to run our podcast. So Podcast SOP, what the heck is that?
So the SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedures, and the whole idea is just to make the entire workflow of every episode you release more organized. For anyone listening to this today, I will tell you Robert is performing what I call a labor of love by doing a podcast. It is a lot of work on that side of the mic. When I'm done here, I'm going to say, thanks for having me, Robert. Appreciate you. And then I'm gone. And then I'm going to share it and link to it on my website once it's out. That's all the work I have to do on this side of the mic. On his side of the mic, there is work that goes into it. And many new podcasters, actually, there's a crazy stat out there, Robert, that I'm not sure if you're aware of, but 90% of people who start a podcast stop before reaching 1 year. So that's like a 90% failure rate. Like that's crazy. And when I started driving into like why that is, I started asking podcasters. I consistently heard, obviously the monetization thing is like the big one, right? But after that one, what I started hearing was it was just so stressful to try to release episodes and get them out on time, and keeping it organized was really tough. And so I wanted to develop something that would help solve that problem. Again, going back to my whole thing, I'm passionate about podcasters. I look for problems in this industry and I create solutions. And the whole idea behind Podcast SOP is, can we release a checklist every time they say I have a new episode going out, that they create the checklist, but it automatically populates it, tags them, tags their team, allows them to upload stuff, tells them the dates they need to have things done, so they can just hit check, 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 and they can know exactly where they're at. And can that alleviate stress? And it's a new product, but we are already finding that it's exactly what it's doing. It is helping podcasters feel more at ease while they're podcasting, and like they have a better handle on it. And you could use Asana, you could use Trello. Those are fantastic programs. I use Trello for actually software creation, but they do so much. So like, Robert, if I'm a brand new podcaster and you're like, hey, use Asana, and I'm already stressed, now I'm more stressed because I'm like, it does 2,000 things. Like, what am I supposed to do here? So the idea of Podcast SOP is, well, let's just make it do one thing, which is help podcasters release episodes on time.
Well, fantastic. And yeah, when you were explaining like all the checklist and all the things that goes into it, it's like, it feels like when's the right time to do the laundry, right? Like if you have like one dirty shirt, well, am I going to do a load of laundry for one dirty shirt? Am I going to record one podcast episode and just like stop everything I'm doing and do all the motions, all the processing, all the uploading, the podcast notes, follow up with the guests? Am I going to do that for one episode? Well, no, I'm probably going to wait until I have a big old pile of laundry. But then now it's too late, because now it's been like weeks since I recorded the podcast. And you're so right that like there's so many juggling of the balls in the air. And so it really help to have this checklist and have the due dates and have the team assigned. And so yeah, and like you said, instead of using Trello or Asana, it's simple, right? Instead of having all these possibilities of things you could do and have to figure it out and figure out your own system, it's already in there. It's already it's already all done. And so I know we mentioned a little bit about like features and things like that, but is there something like unique or really powerful that it would be like a good reason to use this instead of one of these other solutions?
Yeah, one of which is a tool that, or a feature that everybody says that all these others should have. And maybe some of them do, but I haven't ever used it. And it's when you update a template that you create for something, but it doesn't just update that template, it updates that template plus all episodes that currently have that same template being used to change things. I know it sounds kind of intense, but at the end of the day, if step 35, you decide to change it, and most software systems, they'll just change that template in all future episodes, not any that are still pending. But our system allows you to decide, do you actually want to change those that are currently pending? And that was actually the biggest complaint I heard. Like, I started looking at what people were complaining about with Trello and Asana and things like that, and they would not let you do that. So we created something that would allow you to change things in real time. So if you find a better way to, let's imagine you have 10 episodes pending, like you have the next 10 episodes, 10 weeks or whatever it is, ready to go, and you realize, you know what, I hate step 12. It's just annoying. I shouldn't have written it that way. Let me change it. Now it's, most systems are going to say, okay, it's changed for all future episodes, but this is going to let you change that and all existing ones where it's not checked off. That's a really big tool. The other thing we do is we allow you to upload media files, so images, videos, whatever it might be, but we don't do any compression on it. So something people don't know is when you send like a picture over email, it compresses. And then when you upload to your website, like WordPress, it compresses again, which just means it gets more pixelated and it's less high quality. We do zero compression. So if you're trying to share stuff with your team, Podcast SOP actually does it better than most other resources that you can use because we allow you to update it completely raw, exactly how it is, so you get the highest quality content.
Super cool. And again, that's just one of those features where in a general solution like an email or in Trello or something, they don't know what you're using it for. They're trying to be helpful. They're trying to make it more convenient for you by compressing it. But us podcasters say, well, we're uploading it here, then we're going to uploading it there. Like, we don't want to be compressing it again. So it's like not the fault of those other systems. It's like they're not made specifically for podcasting. And now here's the right tool for the right job. So you have Podmatch, you have Podcast SOP. I'm so surprised that I hadn't heard of you until maybe a few weeks ago, but here we are. And what is on the horizon? What do you have planned? What has you excited moving forward into the future?
Yeah, so two things. And this is the, Robert, I'm glad you asked that question. This is the first time I've ever gotten to talk about either of these things, but I really want to help with getting podcasters more reviews for their podcast, which is through Apple. It's like the coveted thing, right? And it does help boost the algorithm. It gets you more people, like visibility, more people find your show. I really want to help with that, but I also want to help a little bit with podcast monetization because I just realized, like, sure, even if you're not trying to make a lot of money, it'd be nice to at least offset your cost. And I'm working on ways to do this with Podmatch and with Podcast SOP to try to build something into these systems. We're not exactly sure like what we're going to call it or anything like that yet, but we're working on a couple really exciting initiatives. So just be looking out for that. What we're going to be helping with next is getting podcasters more reviews and helping them monetize in some simple ways.
And I mean, this is just a great lesson in entrepreneurship in general. Like you said at the beginning, there, if you can find the overlap of your passion plus what people are asking for, then you've kind of found the sweet spot. It's like the ikigai, right? There's like the four quadrants of like what you're good at, what makes money, what you enjoy, and what people are asking about. It seems like if we can find something, plus there's just plus it's an unmet need. I mean, run, don't walk to fulfilling that solution. So we have Podcast SOP, you have Podmatch. Can you tell us about the other things you have going on, like your show and your other websites?
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate that opportunity. So my show is called Creating a Brand, and I've been doing that for years longer than I had any of these businesses. But it's a podcast specifically for early stage entrepreneurs that are trying to make that first stage in their side hustle or considering leaving their full-time job and to go into a startup type of thing. It's designed to bring on people that can actually help them make that first or next step, one that's going to be meaningful, something that's right, and help them grow. And that's really what I do, man. Between, like I said, full-time podcasting, so I've got my show and I've got these two projects, and we're working to merge them all together. So I'm hoping next year to have some exciting news to basically be like, hey, here's our new hub. But we'll see how that goes. But that's everything that I'm up to these days. And if anyone wants to find anything about me, you can just go to creatingabrand.com. That's my hub. That's where I do everything.
And once you coalesce all those things, then you will actually be fulfilling your promise of creating a brand, right? Instead of having this,
right?
This,
yes.
It'll all be a brand. It'll all be unified.
Exactly. I'm working on it. I'm a work in progress, Robert.
and we all are. And I mean, that's the whole name of the game, right? And especially with podcasting, you take imperfect action. And I hear this from guests all the time. Like they go on other shows and they're not really sure if they're in the right place to be because they've only been on a handful of shows, and it gets to the point where you have to maybe talk about yourself more than you are, fake it till you make it, they sometimes say, but then you get to the point where you don't need to do it anymore. And I mean, I see this again and again with some of these podcasters where I have these like multi-years long relationship with where when I first meet them they've only like done a few things, but they're still on podcasts. They still know that they need to get the word out. And it's just like, sometimes it's a numbers game and a matter of being on enough shows, get enough clicks, get enough opt-ins, meet enough people, get enough clients, and then it all adds up. But there's like kind of the faith or the inner motivation of like moving forward and knowing I need to be on podcasts. I need to make it a priority. I haven't made it a priority yet. I need to do it moving forward. And so kind of along those lines, as we wrap up a conversation here, Alex, what do you have as far as the motivation for people if they're gun shy, if they're nervous about being on podcasting, if they're moving slow as mud and they need to get on Podmatch, they need to make podcasting a priority this year and next year? What would you say to encourage and motivate people to be on more podcasts or have more podcast guests?
Yeah, man, I don't mean to take this too deep, but I might go there for a minute here. I think first and foremost, we need to think about why we're doing something. That's so important for all of us. We have to decide, like, what is the reason I'm releasing more podcast episodes, or what's the reason I want to be a guest? And if our motives are wrong, it might be for money, and that can be a good side reason, but the main reason has to be that you want to add value to somebody's life. You want to help. You have a solution to a problem that someone has. And if that really is your motive and that's the proper motive, and you're feeling like, oh, I'm a little bit nervous, you owe it to yourself and to somebody else. If you can help somebody, you should help them. Here's a great example. And actually, this is from Seth Godin. He has a book called The Practice. And the guy has blogged every day for like 17 years or something like that. And he says he's still not good at it. He's just practicing every day. He's like, I release it. It serves people by me releasing it. But he gave this great analogy when I had the opportunity to meet him. He said, Alex, if you were a lifeguard and you saw somebody, you're new, like you're brand new on the job, and you saw somebody out in the water drowning, would you go try to find a better lifeguard for that person to help them? Or would you get out in the water and do your best to try to save their life? And I was like, of course, I try to jump in the water and save their life. He goes, it's no different with the content that you're creating. He's like, you owe it to yourself and those people to put it out there to see whose lives it changes. Just think of it as a practice, not necessarily that you're showing it for the big leagues yet. You're just getting out there, getting your reps in. But by doing that, it's actually able to serve people. So that's kind of the way I'd leave this conversation. I've always found that really motivating. I hope it inspires somebody else as well.
I like that a lot. Very original. Why mess with perfection? Creatingabrand.com, podmatch.com, podcastsop.com. Go to those places and listen to this episode 30 or 40 times until it really gets into your head. You need to do this. And if you don't do it, then someone is going to drown. And you, as the virtual lifeguard, need to jump in and do what you need to do and solve those problems. Podmatch.com. Alex, super great talking to you.
Robert, thank you so much for having me, man. It was an honor to be here.